Hi, and welcome to the National Observer's online conversation series. We're really excited to have you join us this afternoon. I'm Linda Solomon-Wood, Editor-in-Chief of National Observer.
I'm Sandy Garossino. I'm a national affairs columnist, and here we are, everybody. We're finally at the almost at the finish line, the start of the finish line. For fuck's sake, America!
And we have a third guest with us tonight.
Hi,
Karyn Pugliese.
Yes. I wasn't sure when to jump in and introduce myself. I'm on your talks. I'm so excited.
This is a little unpracticed.
So I'm currently a journalism professor at University of Ryerson. I'm a former director of APTN, former news director of APTN, and Algonquin from Pikwakanagan.
Great to have you with us. And those of you on the call, as you know, we're celebrating 5 years of award-winning journalism on a national scope with this special series of talks and interviews on Zoom. So it's great to have you with us today. A couple of things before we dive right in. We have a chat and it's down at the bottom of your screen. And we are going to be taking your questions throughout. So keep them coming. But let's dive right in. So Sandy and Karyn, it's great. Again, it's great to have you both with us. And I just am wondering, like, oh my God, here we are. It's finally upon us. Tomorrow is the day that Americans go and vote, although, you know, they have been voting for weeks and months, and I'm one of them. I voted. But I'm just wondering, to both of you, how are you feeling right now about this, you know, momentous election? And Karyn, we'll start with you.
Yeah, I think what I've been thinking is that there must be something wrong with me because everybody has been so dreading this election, and there are reasons to be nervous. Mm-hmm. And we don't know what's going to happen. And maybe it's just that journalist in me that we run towards the fire. Mm. But I mean, this is actually really an exciting election. And probably one of the more important elections that I'm ever going to see in my life. So I'm actually really excited to sit down in front of the TV, watch the votes come in, and not know who the winner is for 3 weeks.
You'll find out before then.
So how about you, Sandy? You've been keenly watching this election and tweeting about it like crazy. And I know, you know, we've been talking about it for months now. What's on your radar tonight?
I have an obsessive compulsive disorder about this election and about everything to do with Donald Trump for the last 4 years. So on the one hand, you know, this is like somebody was saying, I think it was from Mother Jones, that this is like waiting for your biopsy on your cancer test. And you've got like a 10% chance of having stage 4 terminal cancer and a 90% chance of all clear. And most of that 90% is it's going to be okay. And part of that 90% is there's going to be some really hellish times until you get all clear. So that's how I feel. I feel like we have waited for this moment as it's been clear as events have unfolded for the last 4 years. It's become very clear. This is it. This is the moment. This is the only exit ramp from the Trump administration and possibly from disastrous consequences for America and for the world. So here we are, and let's just hope for that 90%.
Yeah, here we are indeed. I was talking with my mother in New York City. Well, we were emailing this afternoon, and she was telling me that downtown, there a lot of, you know, stores are boarded up. There are, you know, there's just people are really super anxious about what's going to happen. And, you know, even on the Upper West Side, apparently Lincoln Center, they've boarded up windows. So, you know, I think there's a sense of really preparing for something, you know, really terrible to happen tomorrow. What are your guys, you know, like civil war is one of the terms that's been tossed around. Do you guys think that's possible in America right now?
Oh, yeah. Honestly, I don't know. Civil war exactly, I don't know. But conflict, people out in the streets, We might get into this a little bit more later, but I mean, we've definitely seen an uptake of people buying guns. We've seen people, I mean, just the kind of conflict that we've seen between Black Lives Matter and peaceful protests and police moving in. It seems like things that weren't possible a year ago are suddenly things that you couldn't have imagined seeing. You can suddenly see. I think one of the wildest moments for me was that moment where Trump decided to clear protesters out of his way so he could march across the street, hold up a Bible and do a photo op. And I mean, there were so many incredible things about police turning on reporters and police firing pepper spray and pushing over older people and like just things that seem to be out of a movie. And so you sit there and you think about the amount of polarization there is, what people think they have riding on this election, the really strange conspiracy theories that are going on. And it's, ever since Trump got elected, I pinch myself and see if I'm going to wake up. It feels really surreal.
Yeah.
I'm talking to my friends in the United States who are covering this, and they have no clue. They have no clue what's going to happen.
It's interesting that you talk about, you said it just doesn't, it seems like it's from television or something, but what you just described really to me sounds like another time in history. What we're seeing, like seeing an old man, beaten up, or, seeing people turning against the media, that's really straight out of the 40s, the pre-Nazi time, fascism in Europe. I think for me, that's the most disturbing part of all this has been, just the unleashing of those forces and the unleashing of racism. And I guess the question is, I wonder what you guys think about, like, whatever happens tomorrow, can that genie be put back in the bottle? Can those forces be calmed and move back into the background again?
My own feeling is I'm quite hopeful about this, in the sense that I feel like this election in a way is like a fever breaking. And if the polls are right, and of course we all don't know whether the polls are right, but everything that is happening in early voting suggests that they are right, that there is a blue wave coming. That's all, it all seems to be being corroborated. And I mean, there are places like even Texas is showing unbelievable turnout in its blue counties, just beyond anybody's expectations going into this campaign. So I'm hopeful for a very decisive result. And I think a very decisive result will certainly, there's something about power. There's a real mercurial aspect to power. And when someone loses power, as Trump hopefully is on track to do, it has a huge effect. There will be those thousands of them, many thousands of them, that are going to buy into that this was a rigged election. They won't buy into the legitimacy of the election. But as time passes and a transition begins to unfold, which of course he will resist with everything that he's got, and he will also attempt to incite more violence to try and overcome this outcome. That's the really unpredictable part, is what will he do? But I do feel that as weeks pass, the public is going to want calm, and they are going to want and begin to demand a resolution. And cities that are experiencing turmoil and uprising, those cities will be, and I'm thinking about turmoil and uprising from the right now, those cities are going to be demanding that peace be established in the streets. We saw these incidents in Texas of attempts to run the Biden campaign bus off the road. We will see other events like that. There will be bloodshed. There is going to be. But how long it will last in the face of a public that will demand peace in the streets. And, there's a certain legitimacy that comes from a decisive vote of the public.
As someone who, grew up in America, I find it just shocking that we're at a point where we can say about the election, or you could say about the election, that there will be bloodshed, that actually that's what we've come to right now. And that's just really, it's so sad, and I'm watching those, what happened in Texas with the trucks surrounding the Biden bus, as you were pointing out, Sandy. And then in New Jersey, Trump supporters out actually blocking the interstate, blocking cars, disrupting people's lives in that way. There's just like nothing New Yorkers hate worse than like having somebody like create a traffic jam that didn't need to be there because they have to deal with so many things like that. And it's really, it's really tragic to me. I wonder, Karyn, I just wonder what you think about like how this is going to affect Canada.
Oh, I think there's a couple of different ways. Already people are talking about what happens. First of all, there's the what happens if Trump wins. I know what the polls are showing. There's a problem with state polls that we think they corrected. Probably Trump's going to lose, but like who knows for sure. So there's been a lot of speculation about what if Trump wins. I haven't really, I don't know what the plan is if there's a lot of conflict in the US. It may be a little bit of a boon right now that we actually have borders closed due to COVID. I think that there could be an exodus of people like actually coming up to Canada. Weirdly, it happened a bit last election. It's going to be really hard because they are a major trading partner. If there was, there's the two possibilities of a couple of different possibilities of violence, right? There's the idea of what if Trump doesn't step down and tries to incite some sort of coup. I don't know if that's going to happen. I could just as easily see him getting into his car and saying, I didn't want to do it anyway.
Yeah.
Is there a TV show for me? Does anybody have a TV show that I can star in every day at 4:00?
And anyway, I'm not going away.
Yeah.
You'll hear from me every day.
You do not know what this guy is going to do.
That's so true. Yeah.
We've never had to deal with a situation like this. I actually think that there much like Sandy, that there's going to be a period of upset. Maybe it's 3 months, maybe it's 4 months. I'm really hoping it's not long and drawn out, but a lot of it will really depend on what leaders tell people to do post-election.
Yeah. We've really seen the power of, leadership and lack of it over the last 4 years. One of our audience members has said, hang on, this is Kathleen O'Hara. What about the 60s violence? Kent State also, and the civil rights battles. The United States has always been violent, absolutely true, although never so blatantly inflamed by the president. That's true.
That's what makes today so dangerous, isn't it? Is that this man with this gigantic platform is openly inciting and inflaming it, and that was his response to the Texas bus incident, was to basically tweet that more, please. And now he's got Marco Rubio parroting him.
Really, Sandy, I didn't see that. Can you tell us a little bit about that?
Well, Marco Rubio was as he was introducing Trump at an appearance, I think it was yesterday, was saying that was lauding the Texas bus brigade and saying we can do that in Florida too. So
how can these Republicans sell their souls this way?
well,
that is just outlandish that Marco Rubio,
little Marco,
that handsome, unassuming, like what?
But at the same time, yes, there were those eruptions in the 60s. I mean, I lived through them. I was a child in them. Like Linda, I think you did. Karyn looks younger than us, but I don't know.
Karyn's read about them in books.
But periods of extreme civil unrest tend to pass, certainly in modern high standard of living societies. I mean, bear in mind, I'm very mindful of the populations that are not living in those, but they do tend to pass. But yes, we are going to face this. We are going to face it. But again, people talk about civil war. Well, how did the Civil War in the United States start? It started with states attempting secession. It wasn't crowds, rabbles in the street, lighting fires and beating people up and shooting people. That is not a civil war. So I think a lot of the rhetoric, we need to
civil unrest
it back, because we are going to see civil unrest like we haven't seen in decades. It's going to be an extreme test, but I don't think it's civil war. There's one other thing that I really noticed, which is, well, who is really, really upset about this, and what are the population groups, the demographics that are getting behind a lot of this civil unrest? And I was noting that the CNN poll, one of the most recent polls out of CNN, showed that white non-college males were supporting Trump by 68% to 30%, and everybody else was 60% for Biden and 37% for Trump. So that is telling us that it's not a civil war. This is a particular demographic that is trying to bootstrap itself into a status that it's not really entitled to.
Another really interesting thing about demographics, Sandy and Karyn, is that I was reading in the New York Times this morning about the importance of the youth vote, and how, we always know this, but if the youth would get out to vote, the Republicans would basically be finished. That millennials and Gen Z are more progressive, more liberal, is, more the term in the US, than ever any generation before. So do you guys think they're going to get out? Do you think they have been getting out?
Well, I mean, like, there was so much advanced voting.
Yeah.
And there seems to be a higher voter turnout this election. So it shows that people who normally aren't getting out to vote are getting out to vote. Mm-hmm. It looks like it's going to be a higher voter turnout than they've seen before. I'm thinking about the young, non-college educated males versus other youth, and how they choose their parties, and Democrats and Republicans. But Trump is also not really a Republican, right? This is part of what's feeding into this, is that his policy is literally all over the place, and is often, changes from day to day. So a little bit of what's going on in this election is, like this odd dog whistling that goes on to different rights or different groups, sometimes racist groups. And sometimes, he's also gotten some people on board that you wouldn't expect. I was thinking of, and I'm trying to remember the name. I think it's is it Marjorie Dansfeller? She's from the Susan B. Anthony group. She's the pro-life organization, right? Because he's managed to get Supreme Court judges that are conservatives, that look like they could overturn or do something about Roe versus Wade, like the abortion decision from the 1970s. She detested Donald Trump at first, but she's come on board, and I've heard her talk about this as being, she calls it the higher good, because she's pro-life. This is what she wants, and she will deign to support Trump. So there may be the part of his power base, like, might come from certain groups, like the young non-college males. But I mean, it was certainly a lot of Republicans who then got behind him, even though he didn't express their values or willing to make deals with him to keep him in power. Mm-hmm. I mean, that is also part of the dynamic that's going on.
Yeah. So that's so interesting. And, I just want to take a moment to tell everybody again, I'm Linda Solomon Wood. We're talking about the election tomorrow, as you know, and I just want to, at the end of these, I usually stop and say a bunch of stuff about journalism and independent media. I think that watching what has happened with Trump over the last 4 years and the media, for me, has been scary and painful, and has also just made me want to fight harder as a journalist, so that really great journalism can succeed into the future. So for those of you who are subscribers and who are on the call right now, I just really want to thank you for your support. That means so much to us, and for supporting journalism all over Canada. Karyn, you had some thoughts about, we were discussing before this, about how the media has covered Trump and what that might mean for Canadian media. Can you talk about that a little?
Yeah, I think, like, as you know, I haven't had the experience down in the States, but I did get to live there for a year.
Yeah.
And we had people from the New York Times come in and talk about their election strategy this year. And they felt that...
Can I just interrupt you a moment? Can you explain what you were doing in America?
Oh, sure. I had the opportunity, I was a Nieman Fellow, so I had an opportunity to go study at Harvard for a year with a bunch of journalists from around the world. About 50% of them were American and 50% were, from everywhere else. So that was a great, exciting experience. We did a lot of talking about journalism. And really a lot of the feeling amongst mainstream media was that they really missed something. Like they didn't understand what was happening on the ground in the 2016 election. And what they did, what I see a lot of Canadian media doing, where they kind of were in their bubble and they were covering the bubble, and they're getting really into what's the strategy, what's the polls saying, what are the policies, or what are the things
race
at the top. Yeah, very horse race politics. And when I was at APTN, I kept up the idea. It wasn't my idea, but Dan David, the original news director who founded APTN News, he was like really a visionary, and he had said that we should not be covering politics from the top down. We should be covering politics from the bottom up. And, we would go out into communities during elections. We were like, should we cover elections? Because, Indigenous people, have feelings about that. But we decided we would, and we would go in by talking about what the issues were in the communities and bringing them up to the party, rather than what the parties thought the policies were that they should deign to offer the people. And I think what we're seeing this election, I know for the New York Times, it was a very conscious choice, that they were just going to go out and talk to people and try to get a feel for what people were talking about on the ground. And I think that the coverage has actually been a lot richer, and we're understanding how in one state, immigration can be a huge issue. Whether or not it's a huge problem, it's what people are talking about. And over in another state, it could be, grazing lands for cattle. Like, it can be so vastly different. And I think it's really interesting to contrast that with the debates that we heard. The first one was unwatchable. I don't know if you guys watched. I turned it off to 5 minutes. Yeah. The second one, thank God, we were talking about this. My American friends were saying, Canadians are so polite during their elections. I said, because we have a mute button. So I call it the Canadian button. They found the Canadian button where they can mute. And that one was actually pretty watchable, but there still wasn't a lot of, I didn't leave there with a lot of sense of policy. You know, I left there still with a lot of sense of spin and cheap shots, you know, like even though they were being politer, it didn't really give me a feeling of how the world will be different, except for there's either Trump in the future or not.
Karyn, I have a question for you, given your Indigenous perspective, you know, and I think with Black Lives Matter, media rooms across North America, Canada included, really had to start confronting, you know, the whiteness of journalism and the actually very narrow demographic background that most journalists come from. You know, it's a middle class, largely white, probably generally speaking liberal, but forget about the left-right-ism of it all. It's still a really narrow sliver of the broad public. And you've touched on it by talking about the New York Times, you know, going and talking to people in diners. But I'm wondering, even if that white middle class polite-ish perspective blinded the media, and that we're part of what we're paying for now is the fact that media has not evolved and has not given voices to a broad enough range of the public that it could really be seen as this hate was really unleashed on America and seen for what it was and called what it was. Do you think that there's anything about the demographic of the media generally that contributed to that?
Yeah, I mean, I feel like there's part of what it is what gets discussed is right and left. Mm-hmm. And you've got the media divided into right and left, and most people do not live their lives that way. You know, most people live their lives like a purple state. You know, like, that's the truth. And it's like these political teams have almost become like your sports team. It's just like, I'm Republican or I'm Democrat, no matter what, that's my guy. I got his back, whatever he does. You know, and I believe that the media has created that by covering two stories, right versus left. Mm-hmm. I mean, like that is really
on one continuum instead of a full spectrum.
Yeah, it's like, is it development or is it climate? One party says one party says the other, but that's not the reality of how you actually solve problems or create policy, right? You don't sit there and say, we're only going to have climate change, goodbye business. You know, mm-hmm. Or we're only going to have, you know, business, goodbye to the environment. So I think that's part of the problem. But I mean, like, for sure, I mean, you're just not seeing, I mean, I have no sense of what Muslims in America think of the election right now. Mm-hmm. I haven't seen that covered. I've seen a tiny bit of Indigenous, but not too much. Definitely because Black Lives Matter came along when it did, there's been fairly good coverage of a Black community, but it is a single story. I mean, there is more to the Black community than one opinion or Black Lives Matter. I mean, so you know, there are people left out of the conversation.
That's so fascinating. Both of you, Sandy and Karyn. And I want to just tell you that we have a lot of questions now from participants. So what I'd like to do is, we're kind of in the middle of our hour, and I want to throw some of these questions at you guys and, you know, for us to talk about. But if we could kind of move through them a bit more quickly, we can get to a lot of them, and then maybe we'll wrap up with a few more just comments that, you know, come up after we've gone through these questions. So is everybody game for that?
Short snappers, here we go.
Okay, so we're going to start with the question from Mary Janik. I understand that in some states, the electors, those voting in the Electoral College, do not legally have to vote with the majority of the voters in certain states. If that is not the case, can they not award the election to Trump with a huge proportion not voting for him?
Yeah, so Oh, sorry, did you want to go ahead, Sandy?
No, you go ahead, Karyn.
I believe, well, you can help me out because you'll remember which states, but most of the states are sort of a winner take all. So the majority of vote casts, that's the way the entire electoral college is supposed to vote. There were a couple of, there's a couple of states where that's not the case, and there's a couple of states that have tried to impose penalties on, they call them faithless electors when they don't vote the way they're supposed to. The court has struck some down, and I'm not sure if there's any standing. Sandy, you may know.
So I think this question relates to a very kind of dire black cloud article in The Atlantic where someone, I'm forgetting his name just now, was dug deep into this and was discovering that actually, although the election is decided by the voters, the electors are appointed by the governor or the legislatures, the state legislatures, and they are not actually legally required to appoint electors who will vote for according to the popular vote of the state. This is really interesting to me. What I've been gathering from the buzz in the United States is that the big suspect here is Florida. The concern is that if Florida is the tipping point state, that Trump will get Ron DeSantis, the governor of Florida, to appoint Republican electors, notwithstanding a Biden victory there. Now, I've dug into this a little bit and I haven't been able to get an answer. I'll try and make this snappy. Even though the electors vote and they vote in December, those votes are unsealed in the Senate on January 6th. Who is sitting in the Senate on January 6th? The senators that have taken their oath on January 3rd. So the Senate term ends on January 3rd. The new senators come in and they count the votes. The interesting thing is, my reading of the law is that the senators, if the House and the Senate both object to a faithless elector vote, they can vote to refuse to count that vote. And I don't know if that applies to an entire slate of electors from say, Florida. I haven't been able to get enough of an answer from the American legal experts, but that appears to me to be the bottom line, is that the votes are counted in the Senate, and upon the vote of the House and the Senate, if they both agree, they can refuse to count a faithless elector vote.
That is interesting.
Well,
will we get
thank
there?
you for that, Sandy. Diane Trollope asks, what do you think Trudeau will do if Trump wins and people want to cross our borders, which are now closed? Karyn, you want to take that?
Yeah, well, I think he's got a good reason not to let them across. I mean, like, he's got we've already got pandemic restrictions in place. So I think that would keep people from massively crossing the border. But I mean, people can, immigrate here. I don't think, who knows? I don't think there'll be a mass of people trying to get across the border. But my God, weirder things have happened recently. So.
People may be trying to make plans to move, but they're probably not going to be massing at the border. We're probably not going to have caravans of Americans.
There was a
you
really
know what? As soon as I was going to say that, Sandy, but as soon as I say that, I'm like, I'm going to be wrong. There's going to be caravans.
There was a really funny segment on Saturday Night Live this weekend, which showed an American trying to cross the border, and dogs barking, and they ran away. But you know
what's going to happen? I'm going to get marriage proposals.
Right. That happened under Bush. There was like a website that got set up, Marry a Canadian. Yeah, it'll be really interesting. So even if Trump loses, the Republican Party has changed forever, says Linda Marshall. Will they continue to embrace this extremism that Trump has normalized? Are they going to move back to their traditional values?
Well, who's left? you know, in the party. Everybody has been so compromised. I think the worst catastrophe, in a sense, is not the rise of Donald Trump, but the fall of the Republican Party as a party. The Senate just completely caving to him on everything. The kneeling to Donald Trump and kissing his ring by everybody, and anybody who doesn't is excised and is almost has to go into political hiding. It's hard to see where the future lies for the Republican Party. I mean, this is really, in a sense, the Tea Party. This is the wages of sin of the Tea Party, isn't it? This is the extremism that they've started, and they're going to continue with QAnon. I wish I had an answer. I have no idea what the Republican Party will do. And he is not, as Karyn says, he's not going away. He's not going to shut up. One of the big questions to me is, will Twitter suspend his account if he continues with stoking violence? And at what point will, but you know, he's going to be a continuing force forever. And as long as he's there, I don't see the Republican Party pulling away from him sufficiently.
You know, and one of the other things I would just say, like they're going to do what works. We've seen that they've been very pragmatic about supporting him, even when he's done things that are outlandish and dangerous. And, you know, and we've seen it come up into Canada too. I mean, there were a bunch of politicians that tried to Trumpify themselves and tested out the language to see if it would work here. And I mean, that was kind of shocking to see. And now we're seeing, I think what we're seeing with our own National Conservative Party is a little bit of a recognition that in Canada, they have to go back to being a big tent party. So there's a backing away from some of that really alt-right dog whistling stuff that they were trying out for a bit. So there is a possibility that at some point, the Republicans will sit there and say, well, if we, you know, the charisma of Donald Trump or whatever happened in 2016 was an unusual thing. He didn't win again. We can't win again playing that card, and we have to rebuild. There was a really strong sense in the Republican Party that they had to be more inclusive, and they had to be more female friendly, and they had to be more BIPOC friendly. And that just kind of died, you know. But for a while they were almost there.
That's such a great springboard into another topic that we wanted to talk about, I think the three of us, which is misogyny and Donald Trump, and what are the effects of that? What have been the effects of it, and will those effects be lasting? Karyn, do you have any thoughts on that?
I'll keep my thoughts brief because I just talked quite a bit. You know, again, I think there's been a really weird pulling in two directions on women's issues. On one hand, we've had the Me Too movement and this big awakening. And on the other hand, we have this really weird comparison or contrast is the word I'm looking for, with Donald Trump, who I mean started out by saying that he grabbed a woman by the pussy. You know, it's like so again, it's this weird kind of polarization of things. I really don't know where it leaves us.
One of the things that fascinates me about this race and is, you know, for the last number of years, certainly as we've seen with Gamergate and the rise of the incel movement and the rise of the Proud Boys and all of these young male groups that are all pursuing more and more extremism and more dominant, really what is called toxic masculinity, because it is. But that's not about the masculinity. And to me, one of the most fascinating developments of this campaign has been the note that I've started to see in the Joe Biden messaging and a lot of the messaging around him by, you know, the Project Lincoln, the Republicans that have left the Republican Party, of a positive vision of manhood, like a really, you know, responsibility, compassion, empathy, accountability, integrity, all, of course, which are not exclusive values to men, but they are to responsible citizenship. And what's been interesting to me is that I think for a number of years, a lot of our boys have been kind of lost about, well, how do we navigate this world of women's equality and everyone's equality, and I'm kind of mystified by that, so I'm just going to disappear into my gamer culture with my buddies kind of thing. And I think that in some ways a lot of the messaging that we're starting to see is a calling to those young men, saying this is the path, this is how you navigate a world of equality and a world of ethics and a world of a positive world. And I find that messaging extremely compelling and very hopeful. So I don't know what it will amount to, but from the feminist perspective, I think the emergence of a positive vision of manhood, I think, is nothing but a good thing.
Yeah, and you know, that's beautifully said, Sandy. And you know, I think that it has already affected people. There has been such a dearth of role modeling by the President of the United States. It's been so much negative role modeling. So to see Joe Biden giving us positive role modeling, giving our, you know, children positive role modeling is just incredibly heartening. And, you know, whether he's elected or not, you know, that I hope that can continue, because it's so important. Who, you know, from that message come down from the most powerful people. Back to the Republican Party, you know, I just wanted to follow up with what you guys were saying, and to say that what is really shocking to me about watching what the Republican Party has done is how much it all comes down to a personal desire for power. And, you know, we hope that the people we elect, not that we would have elected most of the Republican senators, but we hope that elected officials, that people that go into public service are going to be motivated by a desire to help people, a desire to build the common good, not by personal motivation of, you know, profiting personally. So I think that's the really sad and disappointing part about what's happened to the Republican Party, is that there's such a void of integrity in that way, and of real leadership that, you know, one would hope would motivate that decision to go into public office. So what do you guys think about that?
I don't know what they're about anymore. You know, it's like I said, I listened to the debate, and remember the days when, okay, I don't want to pretend that there was a golden era of politics or anything, because politicians have always been about spin and, you know, getting reelected and et cetera, et cetera. But there was a time when people would stand up and say, here's a basket of goods that I'm going to offer, and they are lower taxes and healthcare or schools, or, you know, something, you know, like there would actually be a basket of goods that they were offering. And I have no idea at this point what the Republican Party actually stands for. Is it the party of small business and lower taxes, or is it the party of, you know, people like, what is Trump even doing? No,
lining his own pocket, Karyn, you know this. This is really all about the grifting, and yeah.
It's so confusing because you don't know what you're voting for. He's, you know, like he's talking like, I'm the best leader and I'm the best this. It's like just become the party of Trump, and underneath that there doesn't seem to be any substance to hang your hat on, is I guess what I'm trying to say. So if Trump loses and is no longer leader of the Republican Party, I don't know what they have left.
Mhm.
Well, let's talk a little bit about voter suppression. There's a question from Harriet Friedman. To all panelists and attendees, please comment on the effects of voter suppression, which is kind of part of what we're already seeing with the, surrounding of the Biden bus, the blocking of the interstate in New Jersey, and, just the appearance of men with guns at state legislatures. I think there's
Polling
the fear
stations.
that that's going to happen. Yeah, polling stations. So what do you guys think the effects of this is going to be? Is this going to have motivated people or shut them down?
As of earlier this afternoon, 97 million Americans have already voted. This is an astounding accomplishment. The number of states with more votes already banked that are in excess of their totals for 2016. There are a number of them. Texas, I believe Florida is one. There are others. And what's extremely hopeful to me is I look at the counties that are getting those early votes, and mail votes we can't tell, but some of them where there's been in-person early voting. Texas, for instance, their Democratic counties, their blue voting counties in Dallas, in Houston, in Austin, in San Antonio, their votes are off the charts, just off the charts. Those counties have upwards of 120% of their total 2016 vote. And of course, we saw the attempt by the Republicans to disallow 100,000 drive-through votes in Harris County, which is Houston. That failed in 2 different court cases, yesterday and today. And there have been other attempts. But look, there are 230,000 polling stations across the United States. So we are going to see certain inflammatory incidents. The objectives of these individuals who are trying to drive buses off the road or to block interstates is to get on the news and to intimidate other people from coming out. But they cannot. I think Harris County was saying they've got 80 polling stations or something like that are going to be open tomorrow in Houston. So if there's something that's going to be on the news in one polling station, you can go to another polling station. So I think that, touch a lot of wood, any attempt to suppress or intimidate voters has so far failed.
I just want to say that number really is so staggering and it's so inspiring. I just get chills when I think about it. And certain elections really mobilize people and really mobilize young people. And when I hear that, I'm just like, I just hope that lasts beyond, that will last beyond this election, that this is not a one-time thing, that this is the beginning of a deeper civic engagement. Not just in America, but, I hope that continues in Canada too. Canada has had some big turnouts in federal elections. I'm not sure if it's on the same scale. Do you guys know?
Oh, we don't have the population, but I think.
No, but I mean proportionally. Proportionally, yeah.
I actually don't know.
I think in 2015, there was just a huge turnout.
Yeah.
Towards Trudeau and the end of Harper.
Yeah, there was a huge turnout in Indigenous communities. They were a swing vote or pushed the vote in quite a few ridings.
Yeah. So let's talk a little bit more about journalism and what harm, just Karyn, do you think that after 4 years of Donald Trump, that the psyche of journalism has been changed or journalists damaged by this? Or same kind of question, or are they more empowered and stronger as a result?
Honestly, a number of the, I don't want to name names, but a fair amount of the Niemans that I was working with said they had waited to do their Neiman year so they didn't have to cover the election. And yeah, I mean, they're finding this really psychologically tough to cover. But I think the other thing that I think to watch in media in the US is the polarized media. It was really interesting because when I was down there, I mean, it'd been a long time. I don't normally watch CNN when I'm up in Canada. I might have flipped it on a little bit in the mornings, but I didn't really sit and watch the way I did when I was down in the US. And they're very much pulling towards the Democrats, the same way that Fox is pulling towards the Republicans. And then aside from them, you've got all the InfoWars and Breitbart and other alt-right media that so many people think really did impact the last election. So, I mean, when I'm thinking of Canada, we're starting to see the rise of, it's not just, it's not a question of just polarization or right or left media or, one issue media, but it's the media that's coming in that isn't really media, that is actually, InfoWars is a disinformation site.
Mm-hmm.
We've got a few of these sites coming into Canada as well. They do not play by the rules. They do not hold to journalistic standards. And, in the US, they've been very influential. And I kind of worry when I see that establishing a base in Canada.
Yeah, they more pose as media sites.
Mhm.
Yes.
than
Yes,
function.
they're malicious actors posing as media. Although, and I think, Karyn, you might agree with this, that CNN definitely skews towards the Democrats, but it's not really the equivalent of Fox News, which has been just flame-throwing, nonsense and QAnon theory. And I mean, there's a difference, I think, between a point of view and actual disinformation, which Fox News has become part of that ecosystem.
Fox News is pulled a lot, and I find that this was interesting because there's some Harvard professors that studied this, that when Fox News gets a little bit too mainstream, Breitbart and InfoWars and the other alt-right media will actually start publishing stuff about how bad and awful Fox News is to kind of pull them back over. So you're quite right. CNN still has facts, and Fox News will deviate from that. But I just meant to say that there is definitely a point of view on CNN at this point. I mean, honestly, there's a few anchors on there that just they have open contempt for Trump, and they show it, they don't hide it. And I think what the problem with that is that it plays into that narrative that Trump so desperately wants, where he can point and say, look, they're being unfair to me. And there's been this kind of question in our own media, like, should we be more opinionated or have more of a point of view? There might be a room for that, but we definitely need some stable players. Like, I think it's convinced me that it's if everybody's putting out their point of view and putting their voice over top of people, because honestly, you're supposed to be amplifying the voices of your sources, not shouting over them in journalism, right? I think that I think that's the issue that I have with sort of the new version of CNN, is that it's a lot of anchors, a lot of pundits, not a lot of regular people. And the point of view plays into a narrative that unfortunately is being, they're doing one thing, but the narrative is saying that they're doing something else that they're not doing.
And the use of surrogates from the parties. Like, I do not care to hear about Jason Miller or whoever is going to appear for the Democrats. I want to hear from experts. I want to hear factual information.
Agreed.
So you guys, we're coming to the end of the hour, and I just wanted to ask you, we have, 24 hours from now, we'll be watching the votes coming in. I'm wondering if you guys have any sense of what's going to happen. Like, what is your sense tonight? Who's going to win?
I think that Joe Biden is going to win. I mean, I'm terrified. I don't know. I mean, God, I thought that Hillary Clinton was going to win. I was off by 77,000 votes out of 150 million. But I do think what I'm seeing in early voting patterns corroborates the polling that's been done by pollster after pollster after pollster after pollster, and they have seen an incredibly steady race. So I'm starting to see, it may be wishful thinking, because I'm always ever the Pollyanna, but I believe we're starting to see a little bit of a run to the Democrats in late voting.
And I don't know either. Like I sit there, I've seen the polls, and I keep remembering 2016. You know, and
I start to cry.
Yeah, just to remind people, the issue in 2016, the national polls were right. They were only off by 1 percentage point.
Yes.
Hillary Clinton did get the majority of the vote, but of course it's the way it plays out in that winner-take-all system in the States. And when we were talking later about the non-college boys, I saw a note in the a note went past in the chat, and somebody said, why are you saying that? Is that like bums or something? It's like, no, it's just that people forgot to count them. And then there was
yes, they didn't weight by education. They treated all weights as the same when there was a vast difference between college and non-college whites in their voting. Like, they were so different that they should never have been bundled together. And especially when college educated white people tended to answer pollsters more frequently. So so the weighting went up according to their answers.
Right. And so that's why we're singling them out as a group, not because we don't like them, just because they voted differently and they didn't get counted appropriately in the polls. So, you know, like, but nobody knew that. And so it's like, you sit there and you go, God, what don't we know this election? So it's hard to say how it's going to come out. It looks like Biden. But I would say, and I've said this before, that even if Biden wins by majority, the idea that this is going to be stabilizing is not necessarily true. A lot of it will depend how Trump reacts. And he's been planting the seeds about voter fraud. And a lot of this is going to depend on, one way or the other, it's going to depend on how people feel about the votes. Did they feel that the votes were counted? Did they feel like something went funny with the mail-in ballots? Did they feel like they weren't counted when they should have been counted? Do they, you know, or do they just think that somebody walked in and threw out a bunch of votes, or, you know, whatever.
They're already pointing to Philadelphia or to Pennsylvania, which is that is the tipping point state. That is the state that Trump has to win. And they're already saying on Fox that, oh, Trump's got to win that by 4 or 5% because there's so much voter fraud going on, which is a complete lie.
Yeah.
Okay, you guys, this has been amazing. Thank you so much, both of you. To be continued. I can't believe this is going to be our last conversation together, because this has been so rich. So this is maybe our last, for fuck's sake, America.
Thank goodness, America.
Thank goodness, America. Yeah, but we'll be back to talk about Canada, or, you know, I hope we can all get together again soon. And I just wanted to tell everybody, I'm so thrilled that on Thursday, Amy Goodman's going to be joining me. And, you know, as you probably know, she was the founder of Democracy Now! She's one of my heroes as a journalist. I just think she is so courageous and so special. And so I'm really excited to hear from her, and I hope you'll all be back. And Sandy and Karyn, thank you so much.
Thank you, Linda. Great to be with you, Karyn. Thanks so much, everybody.
And thank you to everyone for joining us. So good night.